Welcome to Evolve Podcast by Blend 360, produced in collaboration with DataIQ. I'm your host today, Caroline Caldwell, head of marketing here at Blend, and today we're tackling one of the most misunderstood dynamics unfolding in the AI economy today. Enterprises are pouring billions into AI transformation, investors are demanding it, boards are demanding it, and the market said, let's move faster. Everyone's talking about AI transformation, and every company claims that they're actually doing it. But when you look closer, 90% are still in pilot mode. They're AI experimenting, not really AI transforming. And the gap between leaders and laggards is becoming a chasm. So we're calling this the AI value paradox. And to unpack it, I am joined by three incredible people uniquely positioned to decode what's really happening. So from DataIQ, excited to introduce our Chief Knowledge Officer and author of Winning with AI, David Reed. Welcome.
Hi, I'm David Reed, the Chief Knowledge Officer and Evangelist at DataIQ. DataIQ is an information service that supports senior data leaders and AI officers to create impact in their business. And we do that by providing them with connections, insight, and expertise.
And from Blend 360's leadership team, we have our key architects of some of the most ambitious agentic system initiatives happening inside enterprises today, President Oz Dogan and Rob Fuller, our Chief Solutions Officer.
I'm Oz Dogan, President co-founder of Blend 360. Blend 360 is an AI services company. We do help with the leading brands around the world to really help them accelerate their AI transformations and creating meaningful impact on their business.
Rob Fuller, Chief Solutions Officer for Blend. I'm thrilled that, as an AI services company, Blend is actually in the trenches, actually helping clients embrace agentic transformation. And the value that I see it creating and the impression it's creating on these businesses is just mammoth. And so I'm really excited for us to be able to share that kind of capabilities with the broader world. And so that more companies and more people can benefit from what AI can actually do right now and where it's going.
Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So, something that we're seeing unfold is this AI value paradox. Enterprises are being told, move faster, where's your AI strategy? But the moment they invest at scale, investors worry about short-term margin impact. So companies are hesitating. They run small proof of concepts and they never connect those POCs to actual value. So I'd love to get the three of your take on, how do companies really address that paradox and make sure they're actually scaling successfully in their business? And I'll pass it over to Oz to kick us off.
Yeah, sure, Caroline. Yeah, so what we see is what a lot of companies really get it wrong is they tend to have a very myopic mindset, right? So they kind of focus on the tasks and they kind of focus on how they could automate the task and how they can actually run it more efficiently. And obviously, there's also a lot of hype and a lot of excitement around AI as well. So everybody wants to get involved. Everybody wants to get started ASAP. We at Blend, we do get a lot of calls from our customers. Some of them, hair on fire, and saying like, how do we get started? Like can we get started on Monday, right? So, and kind of our perspective there is, yes, there is a lot of efficiency that can be gained by automating your task and workflows that you designed kind of many years ago. But take a step back and think about how you can really reimagine the way work actually gets done inside the company. Take the time to do it and then tie it to value creation, business impact. And what we see is with that approach, there is opportunity to create significantly higher ROI, kind of using some of the AI technologies. But that's sort of some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, David, what's your take on this? You're involved in such a great community of leaders. So what patterns and things do you think we could learn from?
Yeah, I think it is a real challenge because if we think about transformation is not the aggregation of incremental gains. And so starting down that path of looking at POCs, seeing if they might work out without ahead of time thinking, what is the North Star goal that they could build towards? That's one of the reasons I think we've seen a lot of failures in that space. They're just not ambitious enough. They're just not aligned to a big transformational strategy. And there are some relatively dazzling examples beginning to emerge of transformation driven by AI. And if I can just reference one, Klarna, the buy now, pay later credit lender. I included a short case study on them in my book when it was published in mid 2024. And we've just got a big update from them on how things have gone. Now, Klarna has shed 2,500 people from its workforce. About 40% of the workforce are gone. 150 of them customer service reps, because they've automated absolutely everywhere. And as a result, they've driven up revenue 108%. Great, investors really, really happy about that. And for the remaining colleagues, they say that the average salary has risen by 60%. So, that sounds really quite dazzling, but perhaps it's also a little easier if you're in a monoline business where, because of the cost of living, people are looking for alternative sources of credit to pay for purchases. And the internal processes don't suffer from legacy because Klarna is not that old as a business. So I think there's that balance between, yes, it can happen. You can get some real world, really significant transformational impacts versus how do you take the whole business with them? And when I think we hear from Rob in a moment, we've got some other examples we can discuss of more legacy organizations who are finding ways forward, but they maybe don't look as dramatic.
Yeah, no, I like that. There is those dramatic examples, and I also see a lot of the hype of what will be in AI and agents versus what's real right now. And there's a lot of skeptics out there as well. So, we put some effort into creating what we call the critical 7, and we've put this out for everyone to consume, but it's really about how do you strike that balance between your actual readiness, the actual business value you're going to create, having the technical capabilities to do it, the data, and starting to set those foundations. Because like you're saying, if we prove the value on something too small, it doesn't actually prove much at all, right? And some of these solutions still need a lot of work to stand up, particularly when you start to think about re-envisioning workflows. It's not even a technical challenge. It's a process challenge. It's an understanding. And you can have the direction of travel of agents getting better and AI getting better reasoning capabilities, and those things can all be true. But if you don't have well-established foundations on your business of what that process is or what you want it to be, the agents can't solve for that. And even if they could, how do you know if they're doing it right? So where I think it's really important to start is, to your point, David, about a meaty enough problem that there is savings to be had and not make-believe savings, right? If we save everyone 30 minutes a day, what is that, right? Now, if you save every salesperson 30 minutes a day and you say, okay, so we're going to sell more. Okay, now you've got to figure out what's your average effort of sale and when will you see the results of that and how much? Versus if you can get, an area of work that you can start to establish savings in the thousands of hours, all of a sudden you can talk about what are you going to do with those savings of hours? Is it going to be headcount reduction and start to think who, right? Or is it going to be, increased sales expectations or something like that, where maybe there is kind of an infinite amount of work to be done. And then you should be able to set up metrics of how quickly you will see the benefits from that. I think those kind of things have to come together, that it's meaningful to justify the amount of work and do that work in the direction of travel of what AI will become, but recognize that there's a lot of things that still need to be true to make it actually function.
I think that's an important point you make there, Rob, that you have to examine the processes. Most organizations do not have great processes. They just have the things that have evolved, that organically sprung up to deliver the service, create the product, do the marketing, whatever the process is intended to achieve. And they are definitely not optimal in most places. So if you then just apply some automation, or you try to release an agent into that environment, you are creating trouble, because it will do things badly at pace, and that's going to destroy value rather than create value. I'm interested in the there's 7 principles that you've outlined. I'd love to know a little bit more about what those are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we call it the Critical 7, and we actually put it out as an ebook. And actually, we did the first pass with DataIQ, which is great as well. But we pick on those consideration factors for how do you know if a POC for AI would be successful, and then how do you start to scale it? And so it's going through those factors that really can tell you right away, is this the path to success or not? We can go deeper onto that, or I think it's also kind of interesting to think about, since we've already put that out there, maybe leave it for people to follow up with, but really kind of go into some of the things we think are maybe coming with how do you start to do this at scale as well.
That's good. And the one additional thing, I guess, the comment, David, that you made about processes specifically, and a lot of processes, like you said, they're not optimized, but there's also this aspect of a lot of these processes and workflows that they're usually built around a constraint, and a lot of them were built many years ago, especially for a lot of the legacy businesses, and that's where sort of the power of AI comes, and take a step back and think about, like, what if we didn't have those constraints? How would we get the work done? How would we get this process actually built? Like, that's where the big opportunity is. But we're seeing that all over the place. And to your point, being able to reimagine it first and then automate it, that's where the big unlock is.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mentioned earlier about a legacy industry example. So the other week, we handed out an award to Reach PLC, who are the 6th largest digital publisher here in the UK. They do a lot of local news outlets as well as some consumer publishing. And their approach has been iterative. They've focused on creating value step by step, but always with that target of a real transformation. And in a business like media, there are things that everyone working there has to do that they hate doing, and it's usually finding the right image, tagging the content, writing a slug for the website, and so they progressively peeled away at those layers, automated those tasks to release time. To Rob, the point you were saying about what is the productivity gain? Well, if you've got journalists who are bogged down with some mechanical process of getting their story up onto the website, and you can start to automate that, then it increases the pace at which stories get released, which is great for a publisher. Being first to get a news story up is really critical, which means for the advertisers, they're getting those eyeballs, which means the revenue stream follows behind. So their solution, they call Guten, after Gutenberg, fabulous historical printing reference they built into their AI tool. It is agentic. They don't call it agentic, but it is agentic. And it's really paying off for them. They're getting acceleration. They're transforming their processes in a sector. Journalists don't like change, probably more than most other humans in businesses. They're very determined in how they want to do their work, but they've adopted this and they've accepted it, and it's really paying off for them. So it can happen, even in a legacy business, if you have that focus on what are the problems in our process, let's fix them with automation. Let's improve them with automation.
Yeah, no, that aligns really well, right? I love that story because you focused on a couple things: that alignment to the strategy of the business, right? Understanding the pressure and the opportunities for the business and what actually matters, and that continuous improvement. And I think calling it automation instead of agentic is probably smart, right? It can be agents as a form of automation, but sometimes maybe it is just a little bit of more traditional automation or the combination thereof that creates the value. And so, yeah, agents are super powerful, but like getting that process optimized, understanding the pain points of the process, what the benefit of doing it is, and iterating to kind of continually create that's the key. And knowing what your business measures of success are going to be, right? That you're chipping away towards that North Star vision as opposed to thinking this is if I buy it, it's done kind of situation.
So, Rob, to that point, help us paint a bit of a picture around what is that agentic operating model? Agentic's such a hot word right now. And what does that look like for some of those big industries out there, especially in the legacy space?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talks about this being digital labor, and there's truth to that. And I understand the analogy quite well. And this vision of future of, people just managing a collection of agents. And I think that's useful, right? Human in the loop is a significant concept, and having the work automated. But I liked how David was talking about it is it shouldn't be the thought of managing a number of agents as if they're employees. It's that automation is occurring, and it represents what people would have done previously. And that's the new capability, right? We now have essentially a new form of software that can do things that previously only humans could do. And when we put that in with some rationalization and some automation of checking itself and verifying and combining data sources, that's when we start to call it an agent and have that kind of more autonomous capability. But I'd warn people, the level of autonomy is probably not the level that you're thinking, right? If you were to hire, say, a senior executive, that is not the levels of autonomy of an agent. If you were hiring a craftsperson in that publishing example that really knows the industry really well and has a great sense of copywriting and how to edit, that is not the level of autonomy of the agent. They're much more down at the level of write the slug, create a good thumbnail. What is a good thumbnail? How do I tie that to the slug, right? They can be very granular. And so right now we're in that specialization phase, right? Where we can automate things that couldn't be done before, but it's highly automated. We have to plug it, back to Oz's point, into the bigger transformation that we want to achieve. And it's really this execution layer that we're working on. We have to pay attention to the kind of autonomy that's coming and the better rational reasoning capabilities that are coming, but also kind of match it to what's real right now. And that's, do we understand our process? Do we understand how to judge if it's working well or not? Is that documented in some way? How does that relate to our structured data? And those things coming together is then where you can really start to see that role of how do you manage intelligence? How do you use it more effectively? How do you create a control plane to see what's going on? And actually, it's amazing. The net of that is a stronger business than what exists today. Because if you think about most of those business scenarios, you hire people, you give them some training, it's some manager's responsibility to make sure that they're going well, and you're managing the business at a much higher level of KPI, right? Now, I think some of the reason things like call centers have taken off because that level of rigor was pushed down into every function, right? The call center, service center rep answering the call, the time to answer, the scripts to follow, the access to systems and what they can do, when do they escalate, all of those things were very highly structured. And so managing that rollout was quite straightforward. Start to think in those terms for other areas of the business is really what we start to need to do for you to trust that AI is going to work and that these agents are going to create that level of value. And my guess is most companies do not have that rigor on any other kind of function right now. And that's where we start to build towards, right, is having that. And so that's what it means to start managing these agents and managing this level of intelligence instead of the tasks, right? Instead of being at that task level.
Yeah, Rob, I think that's a great example, actually, that you cited there of customer service, where most organizations with that kind of facility have an almost line by line step for every stage of that process. And that's actually what agentic really looks like. I think sometimes when you say agent or agentic, people think it's one thing. There are hundreds of single line agents operating to move a thing a step forward and then looping back if there's something kicks out that doesn't quite work properly, or they've got to go off and get a piece of data in order to take that next step. When you see it broken out, what constitutes a process that's been automated, there are hundreds, there are thousands of those individual agents operating, which I guess, Oz and Rob, that orchestration piece that you've touched on, that's so important when you're tackling this.
Yeah. Yeah, the absolutely the orchestration there it becomes really critical as more agents get introduced into the ecosystem. So it's not just agents doing their job, but also how are they communicating with each other and how are they really coming together to accomplish a bigger job or bigger task. The other thing that as we think about the agentic operating model that's really important is the is the roles, the job descriptions, and the human side of the equation, right? So there was recently there was a quote from the CEO of Walmart saying they employ 2.5 million people in North America, and their CEO was saying all the 2.5 million jobs will get impacted by AI and agentic AI. So there's also that recognition of as we're rolling out these agents into the ecosystem, as we're redefining the way the work gets done, how should we be thinking about the jobs and roles and the job descriptions and our perspective at Blend. I mean, we're AI services company. We do build AI, but even for us, we are taking a look at all the job families that we have. And historically, we had data scientists and data engineers, and it was pretty straightforward to meet different flavors of those jobs. And now there are a lot of new roles and job families that are emerging in the middle around AI engineers and MCP engineer and orchestration engineer and so forth. But this really applies to all the other companies out there as well as they set up their operating model around agentic, the recognition that the jobs will change, the roles will change, and really kind of focusing on that and make sure that they get that right.
I love that because you kind of reminded me to also bring it up. The most tangible examples quite often are those ones where everyone can envision the work, right? And understand what the work was being done. But there's also tremendous opportunities to help with more knowledge-based tasks. So if you think about like executive decision making or market research or things like that, to have a collection of agents at your disposal to help with those tasks and due diligence you may not have done before, whether it's doing kind of real-time research on consumer sentiment or supply chain availability or even geopolitical rules or something, versus all the way down to writing that copyright slug for a publisher. All of those tasks, that is kind of the big unlock. It's not just one type, and it's all levels of the organization.
Yeah, I was trying to think what that looks like from a leadership perspective. To Oz, your point about every role changing. If you're going to lead for that within the business, what model there is that you can have mentally to help you once you are managing humans and agents. And I think the closest I could get was perhaps parenting teenagers if you're managing, an agentic business, because, with teenagers, you set boundaries, you monitor their behavior to see whether it's operating within those boundaries, and you give them rewards or punishments if they step outside. And if you start to think about agents and agentic and autonomous businesses that way, it feels like it makes sense. The one bit we don't yet know is what the punishments might be for an agent that operates outside its parameters. I suppose it just gets switched off, but maybe that's easy at the moment. Maybe it'll be less easy in the near future.
Reminds me of the Matrix, right? The cleanup process.
Yes.
I like that. I think there's, and it kind of exposes that challenge for the organizations of what are the rules? When have they actually been violated or not? Where is that articulated?
So one interesting piece here when we think about scaling AI is it all comes down to your data, those strong data foundations that are needed to build these complex systems on top. And so I'd love to get your perspective on a bit of the enterprise thinking that they had strong data foundations. And now this world of AI has emerged, and we're having to kind of go back and say, well, are they as strong as we thought they were? Are they set up the right way for us to scale AI? So love to get your perspective on that.
Well, Caroline, there's a word that we all know working in data. It's called the workaround, right? Very little of the activities that we've all been doing up to now haven't involved some kind of workaround because the data's not quite right or in the right place, or the systems, don't allow it to flow where it needs to be. But until about 2.5, 3 years ago, no one in the outside world saw that. The dirty laundry was never visible externally, and then suddenly you're surfacing through a chat function or generative AI search or whatever it might be, and it reveals all of those problems that have kept a lot of data practitioners very busy, and maybe they will find some agents to support them and fix those issues, but it wasn't so visible as it's suddenly become. And I think that's the real challenge that we're suddenly facing into right now.
Yeah, I yet to talk to a customer, when the topic is AI, that says like, my data is in great shape and I took care of everything and it's perfect. We just have to come in and build AI, right? So it's a big enabler for AI, but it's also a big challenge. Even companies that actually invested quite a bit in building their data foundations, they're finding themselves in a position to having to strengthen the foundation and build more foundations, build more robust foundations, because there's so much change with AI, and obviously data is the fuel of AI, and new modalities, the unstructured structured dynamics with unstructured, going from text to video to audio and different types of forms of data, which obviously creates more effective and high value solutions. But it's a big challenge and in the ecosystem, and also what we're seeing is a little bit of the fallacy of, because it's so easy to build proof of concepts in AI, that kind of gets you 85% there, but to get to the 99.9% solution, which is the production grade solution, there's so much rigor that needs to be really put into the data foundation. There are, some of our customers get that and get that right, and they really invest and keep investing, because ultimately that's really the only way to build these scaled production grade AI solutions.
Yeah, there was so much focus on structured data, and most companies, their foundations there aren't all the way. You have to start thinking about this as if this is nearly human level capabilities, and it's not there yet, but direction of travel. If you had infinite time, could you answer any question for the organization, right? Which would be a combination of policy, what system to look it up in, how to query that system. All of that needs to exist if we expect the AI to do it, right? And so if you think about how would I, get an agent to be able to do a task, how do I get it to maybe even refine and have the expertise to do that task? How do I articulate that expertise? Quite often we don't have that in our organization, and we expect it from our hiring process. We hire experienced people with a certain type of experience, like crazy simple things, but like you wouldn't have a training program for medical copywriters. You would hire someone from the field of medicine and train them, or someone from the field of copywriting, and you pair them with a physician or something to do medical copywriting. That's a very highly specialized example, but we see that, right, where that documentation of what is effective medical copywriting doesn't exist. It is the combination of those two skills coming together. Or if you needed more physicians, and how do you support a physician? You think of, what would you train the AI on, right? The hospital probably doesn't have that information. So you need to go back to kind of the educational system to get that kind of information. So that kind of concept of what we're calling the evals and how you could actually set up the reasoning capabilities is where a lot of the work is completely net new for most companies, that there's very little work to base on. The structured data, where we think of when we think data, you think Excel and databases and SaaS platforms and things like that. Those tend to be a little further along. And we can use AI to help in these situations, right? These large models have a lot of data in them and can intuit. And so we've done some really interesting work with using it for essentially resolving and harmonizing disparate data sets and how you bring them together and make logical intuition. So AI can help us with some of these problems, but you can't just jump straight to the end state, right? There's going to be a bit of a journey to get through.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, Rob, not least because, none of us have worked in businesses that run this way. This is so new that we're all learning as we go along. And some of the reasons why the data foundations are so problematic are that the technology that's creating some of the data that we want to push towards our agents is sitting in places that never existed before. So just as an example from DataIQ, we're an information service. We talk every day with our clients about their challenges. We're recording those calls and they're being transcribed by AI. And we have an agent that wants to interrogate those sources in order to support our client service team to match someone who's got a problem with someone who's solved that problem. That works great, provided those transcriptions aren't sitting in an individual OneDrive. They need to be in a central SharePoint. And just getting to that simple stage of thinking, oh yeah, it will help me if I lift and shift. Now maybe there will be an agent very shortly that will actually do that for someone. But it's an example of the sorts of issues with all sorts of data that arise in businesses, and businesses at scale, have multiple domains where business critical information is being stored that you want agents to face into. If you scale that up to 2.5 million employees, if each of them is just putting one piece of data into a system each day, and of course it'd be a lot more than that, you can imagine the problems if it doesn't go into the right place.
Let's land this conversation. For the enterprise leaders, what is the one big takeaway that you feel they cannot ignore as they're thinking about this future of AI, transformation, agentic system? And let's kick it off, Oz, with your take.
Yeah, I mean, the one big takeaway would be the bigger AI ROI comes from reimagining how work gets done. So instead of just focusing on automating what's in front of you and your existing processing workflows, really take the time to reimagine how work gets done. And that's where the real power of the AI transformation will get realized.
Yeah,
love that. And then go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in next just because I interrupted. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's right. And to think about it is going to be hard work. It's not easy. Everyone makes it sound super easy, but there's tremendous value there, right? And your business can come out a lot stronger, both on the top end, and in growth and in your efficiency, but you're going to have to put the work in. So make sure that it's strategically aligned and you're recognizing the work is really describing what it is you do and how do you want it to operate. What are those guardrails? Or as David said, even what are the punishments for that teenager that you're letting loose?
Yeah, so for me, thinking about brands trying to deploy AI rather than the developers, the brands who are trying to deploy AI, there's no reward for ambition. The reward is for execution. And it's really important to remember that your customers don't want AI, but they do want your brand with AI.
I think these are all fantastic points, and I want to give a big thank you to all three of you today for this topic and great discussion.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
Great to talk with you.